What's up everyone? So as we saw, the Google Pixel 3 XL just came out and I was like, man, everyone's gonna keep talking about it. There's no point in even mentioning it. Everything that everyone said has already been out. So why not take a step back and let's take multiple steps back to the Nexus 5X and see how this thing still holds up in the later part of 2018. Now, I did not know this until I actually picked up my Nexus 5X, but this phone actually got supported up until Android Oreo, and I actually did not know that. I knew Nexuses got supported for a long time. Okay, don't get me wrong. I've owned Nexus devices as main phones before, but that's still pretty crazy. And the fact that this phone got supported for that long, it's just really a testament to the Nexus line and the Pixel line as well, which also inherited all those aspects of the Nexus line. Now, looking around the body of the Nexus 5X, I still think this phone is fairly okay. You have to remember this phone came out in 2015 in September, so this phone actually is a little bit over 3 years old at this point. And it was actually released in October of 2015. So this phone is actually like 3 years later. I still think it's pretty good, okay? I don't think it's cheap. I don't think it feels horrible. Now, it is mostly plastic, but you also have to remember that this phone was priced pretty low, you know, compared to what the Pixels were priced for and what all these other phone manufacturers. This phone I would mostly compare to the OnePlus series of this time, because I don't really remember the initial release price, but I would say it was not like $1,000 or anything. Now, because of that, it doesn't feel the most premium, like I said, but it doesn't feel horrible either. But if a phone manufacturer released a phone that felt like this today, there would be uproar. Like, it would not be good. But considering the time, it'll get a pass. Now, cool thing about this is actually it does support USB Type-C, which is pretty cool. The phone before this, the Nexus 6, did not support it. It just took a regular micro USB, but this and the Nexus 6P both support it. It's super cool. You also have a headphone jack on the bottom as well. Now, one cool thing about this phone is that it did have a front-facing speaker. Both slots were not speakers, which is kind of weird. But still, I would take a front-facing speaker than no front-facing speaker at all. You also have a SIM card slot on the side. And the coolest thing about this is that the fingerprint sensor was mounted on the back, and this was the first time we saw a fingerprint sensor on a Nexus device, this and the Nexus 6P, and it was on the back, which was pretty strange at the time because a lot of phones still kept them on the front on the home button, but since this phone didn't have a home button, they actually just put it on the back. And I'll say at this time, it's still really like, it's an okay fingerprint sensor, like it does the job, but I like the design aspect of it. I like how it's just there and it's not a button. You just you just put your finger on it and it automatically unlocks the phone. And I really like that about this device. But yeah, that's enough of the body of it. Now, it does have a 5.2-inch screen up on the front, 1080p, and I'll say that it's really not that bad again. A lot of this phone I can just sum up as not that bad. Even 3 years later, I mean, we're still seeing 1080p panels like the OnePlus 6, the iPhone XR that just got released is going to be released next week. That thing doesn't even have a 1080p display, so you can't really hate too much on the resolution. Now, the PPI isn't that bad either. Pixels per inch is 423. So as a whole, I mean, I'll say this panel is definitely not the worst aspect of this phone. Kind of a strange thing about this phone, but I'll get into it in a second. But in terms of the panel, it still doesn't look that bad. Now, one thing you have to remember, it is IPS, so you're not going to be able to have like an always on display or anything. And one weird thing is that Android does kind of have this like pulsing display a little bit. So if you touch it or tap it, it'll actually like turn the display on. Now, because it is IPS panel, it doesn't turn on just those pixels, it turns on the whole screen. So it can be kind of a disturbance a little bit, but like, what are you gonna do? It's not that big of a deal. Now, going to software, like I said, this was a Nexus device. So it started off getting Android Marshmallow 6.0. and it got a couple years of support, and it got up to Android 8.1, I believe is what I have on this. And right now my device is on Android 8.1, which is pretty cool. I mean, that was just the last version of Android that was just released earlier this year, I believe. And now we have Android 9.0. Now this device is not going to get it, which is okay. Android 8.1 is pretty respectable, and I got 3 years of support, which is crazy, and I love that. But there is a pretty decent sized ROM community behind it. I'm sure if there's not already Android 9.0 ROM out for it, there probably is going to be. So you can always root it, ROM it, Polkadot it, Countryfied, it's all good. It's pretty easy to do. Now, in terms of the specs, it has the Qualcomm Snapdragon 808 chipset, a hexa-core CPU clocked at 1.4 gigahertz, an Adreno 418 GPU, and 2 gigabytes of RAM. Now, honestly, with those specs, like, I'm not gonna sit here and say like it's the fastest phone ever. It's definitely not horribly slow. I mean, if you wanted to use this as a main phone, you probably could. Like, it's not gonna be a challenge at all. Like, it's not like you're using the first iPhone or first Android or anything like that. But I'll pretty much just tell you like this, you know, a hexa-core processor clocked at 1.4 gigahertz. It's really not that much, and I know I said it wrong. The Adreno 418 GPU wasn't really the strongest at the time, and obviously it's not the strongest anymore. 2 gigabytes of RAM isn't that much either, if I'm being honest. Now, you're going to be able to do tasks, like it's not going to be a problem. You're going to be able to do everything just fine. If you want to just multitask between apps, if you want to, let's say you need Snapchat, Instagram, whatever, you'll be fine in terms of that. But if you try to go like anything crazy, like for example, I tried to play Real Racing 3 on it and I just started a little bit, but it's just not that good. Like, it's very choppy. So in heavier intensive stuff, you're definitely going to notice frame drops, games not playing at their full potential, even at lower graphics. But even at that point, I mean, I don't think if you're getting a Nexus 5X right now, you're going to be doing the most intensive apps, the most intensive games. I think you're just trying to get something that can, get you from point A to point B, not necessarily point A to point like G or something. That's like the best analogy I've ever freaking made in my life. So in terms of that, you'll probably be better off getting a Nexus 6P or something with a little bit more, specs or performance, but I would hesitate you going that route too, and I'll get into that in a second. So in terms of performance for smaller apps, not that intensive stuff, you'll be pretty much set on it, but if you try to go to something heavier, then yeah, you're going to run into some problems. Now, going into something that also is kind of weird on it, the camera is actually like not bad, but not horrible either. Now, in my opinion, I'm not the best photographer in the world. I'm not like the best camera comparison person, but I look at a camera, I'm like, is it good or is it not? Right? The Nexus 5X camera is on the better side. It's not completely 100% horrible. It's a 12.3 megapixel sensor. It has a wide angle effect to it, so that's pretty cool. Other than that, I mean, that's really, in terms of camera, I mean, like I would rate it probably like a 6.5 out of 10. It's not horrible. I mean, the Nexus 5X and the Nexus 6P both had pretty decent camera sensors. One thing to note is you are able to shoot 4K on it at 30 frames per second, which is pretty cool. I like that a lot. I was not expecting that. I thought it would only tap out at 1080p, but that's pretty cool. I mean, some cameras still, the Google Pixel 3 XL, which has an amazing camera, still can only go up to 4K at 30 frames per second. So the fact that this camera has it is pretty sweet. So in terms of camera and everything, you'll be okay. You're not going to be like complacent, but you're not going to be like, oh my God, this is amazing either. So, that's probably the best way I can explain this camera. The front camera is 5 megapixels, and this is honestly probably the worst aspect of both camera sensors. The front camera just isn't really that good in my opinion. It shoots 1080p videos, but if you're on Snapchat or something, it'll probably be okay. But if you try to take like a really good selfie in even like weird lighting condition, it's not going to be that good in my opinion. So yeah, overall camera, I'd probably rate it like a 6.5 out of 10, maybe like a 6.7. It's not completely horrible, but it's like not amazing either. Obviously it's not going to be amazing, but some other camera sensors that came out in 2015 are still pretty good. I think the iPhone 6s, which came out the same year as this phone, it has a pretty good sensor. The Galaxy S6, I believe, came out the same exact year, and that had a pretty good sensor as well, so just kind of keep that in mind. Now, another aspect which I don't really like about this phone is the battery life. Now, it has a 2,700 mAh battery, and you would assume because, the specs aren't that great, the software, stock Android doesn't really suck up that much, you would think the battery life would last a while, and it definitely isn't horrible, but I would have expected more out of a phone, especially that's like stock like this. I remember the Nexus 4, Nexus 5, Nexus 6 had pretty decent battery life, I would say, but it was a humongous phone, so it kind of had power more. But in terms of this, I would say that the Nexus 5X battery life is very mediocre. I think it has a lot to do with the battery depreciation. So when this phone was released, it was full 2,700 mAh, but now, there's no way it's 2,700 mAh still. Batteries depreciate over time. It's not just a Nexus thing, it's every single phone, iPhone, Samsung's, LG's. When you're getting a phone like this used, it's probably not at a full 2,700, it's probably more like 2,200, 2,100. Now, there's no way in Android to actually see the battery life test unless you download a third-party app. Apple actually has a one up here because they actually allow you to do it within the settings app, but they would have never done that if some guy didn't expose them. So in terms of battery life, I'll say if you put a new fresh battery in it, maybe you'll get a different performance and different longevity of the battery life and make it last longer. But on the battery of my unit, it's really not that good. I'll probably rate like a 5 out of 10, honestly. Now, the biggest thing, and the reason I kind of wanted to say this at the end was, before you go out and just buy this phone or anything like that you think is perfect, one problem this phone had, which happened to a lot of LG Nexus 5X devices and just a lot of LG phones in general, was a boot looping issue, and the Nexus 5X had it, and I'm not really too sure what caused it. I think it might have been a motherboard problem or something. I don't remember what it was, but a lot of these phones weren't going past the boot up logos. When you boot it up, it goes to Google and then it goes to the loading screen, Android is starting up, whatever, or just go to the app's lock screen. Well, what happened was it would just keep being in this loop of just the Google logo on the front, so you would never be able to actually access the phone. Now, on my specific device, it's okay. I don't have that issue, but that issue does exist, and a lot of people complain about it, not only for the Nexus 5X, but for the LG G3, the LG G2, and I believe the LG G4 had that issue too, and the LG G5, so a lot of LG phones had that issue. And that is a huge issue. I wouldn't necessarily have that stop you from getting a phone, but at the same time, when it was as widespread as that, it kind of does hesitate me a little bit from recommending it. And even though this phone does have, it looks pretty decent, I will say, it doesn't feel the best, but you do have a fingerprint sensor, you do have a front-facing speaker, you do have USB Type-C. When you factor that part in, it really does kind of hesitate me from recommending it. So what I'll say is the Nexus 5X still worth it 3 years later, in the later part of 2018? I'll say it really depends, you know, like if you find one in pretty good condition, I mean, I'm pretty sure the boot looping issue can happen with anybody. And I'm unsure as of this point if LG still does factory replacements or warranty replacements or anything like that. But what I'll say is that if you can find one you're 100% sure it's not going to have any problems and you're okay with taking that risk, then the Nexus 5X is not a horrible option. You know, you can probably find one for like $60, $70. They're not like crazy expensive. And if you just need a phone for like a couple months or like a week and you just have it or someone's selling it to you or whatever, then yeah, get it. I mean, it's not going to really cause you any harm. But if you plan on keeping a phone for more than like a year, just know that this phone is pretty much like Russian roulette, and like it can go out anytime. And you might think it would never happen to you, but I remember with my LG G2, people were complaining about a touch disease problem where like the top third of the screen wouldn't work, and I'm like, it's never gonna happen to me. I take good care of my phone. And then randomly it just started happening to me. So just kind of keep that in mind. You know, that's kind of a risk you take when getting a used phone, but problems are always going to be there. You know, we've seen it with the Note 7, we've seen it with the iPhone XS with Beautygate and all that stuff. So problems are always going to occur, but this one was a pretty big problem. But that's pretty much my opinion on it. Now, if you do want to get a Nexus 5X, I'll leave a link in the description for one certified refurbished. Usually when you kind of mess with a phone like this, certified refurbished is probably the way to go, but it also helps support the channel if you buy it through that link. So I'll leave a link down there if you want to get it. But that is pretty much it. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber we get really does count, so it means so much you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, that's also linked down below. Definitely check out those videos. I do a lot of iOS comparisons, iPhone stuff, sometimes Android stuff too, but check that channel out. I really appreciate it. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.